The minute we stepped off the plane in Sarasota, I knew something had shifted. Not in the air, it was thick and wet, sure, but I'd grown up in that kind of heat. No, the shift was inside me, like something had already started cracking before I even reached the baggage claim. Jude's hand was tight in mine, his backpack bouncing with every step. He clutched the drawing he'd worked on for days, a colored pencil sketch of Grandma Dolores's old garden swing. I didn't have the heart to tell him she'd replaced it years ago. He'd find out soon enough. 10 hours of travel behind us, no sleep, and I was already rehearsing smiles I didn't mean. The rideshare driver barely made a sound the whole drive. Probably could sense the silence between me and the road. I stared out the window, trying not to count the palm trees like warning signs. When we pulled into Dolores's driveway, the house looked just like the photos, neat, sterile, curated. The lawn was trimmed down to the inch, the flower beds shaped like a lifestyle magazine spread. Everything looked ready for company, everyone but us. She didn't come outside, just opened the front door halfway and called out, "You're skinnier than the pictures. You must be tired." No hug, no "hi baby," no mention of Jude's drawing. Her eyes scanned the suitcases like she wasn't expecting more than a handbag. Corliss appeared behind her, full makeup, party dress, holding a glass of something pink and sparkly. Her smile was sharp, polite. "You made it, just in time." I nodded, resting my palm on Jude's back. He leaned into me a little. That small act told me everything. Dolores stepped aside. "Your room's down there," she said, pointing to the basement door next to the fridge. "Sheets are clean." I blinked. The basement? It's cool and quiet. Honestly, it's better than upstairs. More privacy. "Is there natural light?" I asked. She shrugged. "It's a favor, really." Corliss was already heading back toward the laughter in the living room. Jude looked up at me, eyes unsure. "It's fine," I whispered. "We'll make it cozy." We carried our bags down ourselves. The steps creaked. The air got thicker with every foot. Down there, the room was square, undecorated, cement floor partially covered with an old rug, a twin bed, a laundry machine, and the smell of detergent that had settled into the walls. There was a lamp. No window. I set our bags down gently. Jude sat on the edge of the bed, swinging his legs. "Does it count as a room if it doesn't have a ceiling fan?" I smiled, just enough. "It counts because we're in it." He didn't laugh. He just lay back. Upstairs, the party was already underway. Clinks of glasses, bursts of laughter. I changed quickly, combed Jude's hair with my fingers, and we walked up, adjusting to the noise like stepping into heat again. I introduced myself twice before someone remembered me. "Oh, you're the daughter from out of town, right?" Corliss's daughter, Brielle, ran around the room, hugging everyone. She called Dolores my grandma, with a pride that echoed. Jude stood beside me, holding the drawing still. "Can we give it to her now?" he asked. I shook my head. "Let's wait until she's free." Corliss was getting compliment after compliment. "She's always there for Dolores," someone said. "Moved mountains to make this house happen." I looked at my hands. My left thumb twitched, an old habit I thought I'd kicked. Then the lights dimmed. A projector screen came down. "Our family, our legacy," the slide said. Photos started flashing. Corliss at prom, Corliss at college, Corliss holding Brielle at the beach, Dolores smiling behind her, birthday cakes, Thanksgiving tables, Christmas lights wrapped around the same three faces. Not one photo of me, not even when we were little, not even my father's funeral. Jude leaned in. "Why aren't we in any of them?" I didn't answer right away. My throat had gone dry. "Maybe they didn't find the right photo," I whispered. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. The room clapped. People whistled. Dolores wiped a fake tear. I looked across the room, and Corliss was watching me. Not smug, not apologetic, just calm, like she'd waited for this exact moment. And in that split second, I understood something that would never unstick from my ribs. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't oversight. This was design. After the slideshow, I stood still for a moment longer than I should have. People clapped. Jude looked up at me. I smiled like I hadn't just disappeared from a timeline that I helped build. We returned to the basement to freshen up. Jude changed into a polo shirt and khakis I'd ironed days ago. I swapped my travel-wrinkled blouse for something less tired-looking. He asked if now would be a good time to give Grandma the drawing. I told him not yet, just a little longer. He nodded without asking why. That somehow stung more. Back upstairs, the noise wrapped around us again, laughs too big for the conversations they came from, people sipping from glasses that didn't match, trying too hard to look natural. I nodded at a few I didn't recognize. No one really looked back. Jude stayed close, holding the card tight in his fingers. Then it happened. Brielle floated past, her sundress swinging like she was in a commercial. She paused just enough to glance at Jude and say, clear as a bell, "You're sleeping in the basement. That's where they keep cleaning stuff." A few nearby adults chuckled, awkward, unsure, like they weren't sure whether to correct her or just pretend it didn't happen. Jude blinked. He looked at me, not crying, not even frowning, just unsure what to feel. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. Sometimes people say small things to feel big, I told him. Don't shrink. He nodded quietly, like he knew to believe me, but I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not just because of what Brielle said, but because I knew, deep in my gut, she didn't come up with that on her own. That kind of cruelty gets passed down in tone, in timing, in the way someone laughs a second too long. I spotted Dolores near the kitchen, laughing with two neighbors over potato salad. I waited until the conversation lulled, then stepped in with Jude. He held up the card. "Oh, sweetie," Dolores said, flashing a smile without warmth. "That's adorable." She took it with the same hand holding her wine glass and set it under a stack of paper napkins. Jude whispered, "Shouldn't she open it?" "She's busy right now," I said softly. "We'll check on it later." He nodded again, but that nod didn't come from trust. It came from surrender. We moved toward the edge of the room, found two empty chairs near the patio door. I kept my eyes on the napkins. It was as if the card had dissolved. That drawing had been meant to be a bridge, a gesture, a thread of connection from a child who still believed love was simple. And now it sat there, buried beneath something meant to wipe grease from a chin. A while later, I went downstairs to get Jude's jacket. The temperature had dropped a little, and I didn't want him catching a chill after the long travel day. The basement door creaked open, and the air hit differently now. I walked over to where we left our things, but the suitcase wasn't there. Panic didn't hit immediately. It slid in slow, like cold water up the ankles. I checked again. No bag. I went back upstairs, circled around Dolores, and asked, as lightly as I could manage, "Did someone move some things out of the basement?" She barely looked up from her conversation. "Oh, the helpers moved some stuff out earlier. Said there were extra bags by the laundry. I told them to send it to Charity. Thought it was just junk." Charity. I didn't respond. I walked out to the garage. One of the side doors had been left open. There, sitting next to a box labeled "Donation, Pick up tomorrow," was our suitcase. Unzipped, slightly slouched. I knelt down. Inside were our clothes, scattered. Jude's baby picture, one I'd kept inside my wallet for years, was lying on top of a pair of shoes. It stared up at me with its curled edges and half-faded smile. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I zipped the suitcase shut, stood up, and carried it back down, one step at a time. Back in the party, the lights seemed brighter than before, too bright. Corliss glided by and handed me a glass of wine. "You look pale. Everything okay?" she asked, head tilted. "Florida heat," I said, sipping slowly. "Takes getting used to." She smiled. "You'll adjust." I smiled back. But I wasn't adjusting. I was observing. There's a difference. We stayed a while longer, enough to be polite, enough not to stir whispers. As the sun dipped lower and music drifted into something softer, I excused myself and Jude. We went back down, settled onto the twin bed. He curled up next to me, his head on my arm. The cot creaked every time we breathed. He whispered, "Why does it feel like we're not really here?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, low and flat, "Because we're not." Most of the guests were gone by the time I pulled myself off the couch. Jude had fallen asleep across my lap, his hand still curled as if holding the card that was now buried under napkins and coleslaw stains. Dolores was near the door, hugging the last couple goodbye with that version of warmth she saved for people who never needed her. She looked like someone's loving grandmother. Someone else's. Corliss passed me with a drink in her hand, brushing my shoulder lightly. "You really should come around more," she said, not quite smiling. Her voice didn't carry sarcasm, it carried certainty. I nodded, polite, quiet, exhausted, not just tired from the flight, tired from pretending to still believe in things that had already shown their cracks. Jude stirred as I lifted him. I carried him up the stairs slowly, meaning to find a clean towel for him, maybe to wipe his face or just do something that felt maternal and normal. I walked past the master bedroom, door wide open. I stopped. Inside, Brielle's bright pink suitcase sat open on the bench at the foot of the bed. An iPad glowed from the nightstand, charging. Her flip-flops lay on the floor like she owned the place. A pink robe with her name embroidered in glittery thread hung on the bathroom door. This room wasn't just being borrowed. It was claimed. It wasn't Dolores's anymore. It wasn't even neutral. It belonged to Brielle now, the child of the daughter who stayed close, stayed loyal, stayed useful. I stood there longer than I meant to, towel in hand, jaw tight. My own voice echoed in my head. "It's just a room. Don't make it a message." But it was a message. I turned to head back down when I heard Dolores's voice from the hallway around the corner. "She floats," she was saying, casual as pouring tea. "No anchor." Another woman responded with a light chuckle. "You mean Wesson?" Dolores laughed, soft but certain. She was never one to stay put. "I don't even think she's ever really belonged. Not here." They didn't see me standing 5 steps away, frozen. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. I walked away slowly, still holding the towel like it was my last shred of self-control. Down in the basement, Jude was still asleep. I placed the towel on the foot of the bed. I sat beside him but didn't touch him. I stared at the ceiling. It was low, unpainted. The kind of ceiling you see in unfinished basements. The kind no one ever looks up at unless they're lying down, trying not to cry. I didn't cry. I counted cracks. Thought about how many years it took for a house to fall apart silently. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos. Jude in his Halloween costume. Jude at the beach with his mom. She'd been gone 3 years now. Somehow she still felt more present in these moments than anyone upstairs. I realized something heavy. I'd fought so hard to make sure Jude felt loved, seen, important. And my own mother had never done that for me. Not once. The weight of that settled in my stomach like lead. Not pain, just confirmation. I stood, walked over to the mirror above the washer. I looked at my face, not tear-streaked, not trembling. Just done. Not broken. Not bitter. Just done. It wasn't that they didn't see me. It was that they did, and chose to act like I wasn't there anyway. And I let them. I let them, thinking it made me strong, thinking silence was noble, thinking endurance was the same as grace. I looked away from the mirror, walked back to the bed, reached into my bag and pulled out Jude's drawing, the one he gave to Dolores, the one she tossed aside with the napkins. I placed it by the laundry sink, neatly. She could find it tomorrow. Or not. Didn't matter anymore. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the stillness. If this is what love looks like, maybe I've been aiming for the wrong house. The morning came heavy, not loud, not abrupt, just heavy. I woke to the faint buzz of the furnace cycling again, a dull reminder of where we were sleeping. Jude was still curled up at the edge of the cot, one leg half hanging off, red blotches starting to form where it brushed the cold metal pipe during the night. I adjusted his blanket gently, stood up, and climbed the stairs. The door to the main floor creaked as I pushed it open. Dolores was already in the kitchen with Corliss, both moving around the room like it was just another casual Sunday. Dishes clinked, laughter spilled in measured doses. They didn't miss a beat. Dolores glanced up. "There's coffee if you don't mind the off-brand creamer," she said with a smile like it cost her nothing. I poured a cup, didn't reply, just held the mug in both hands, trying to feel something warm. It hit me right then, how they had already moved on. Past the party, past the slideshow, past the silence. But I was still standing in yesterday, or maybe I'd never left the basement at all. Clara, one of the overnight guests, second cousin, maybe third, approached with that look people wear when they're about to make small talk. She had a plate of toast in her hand, chewing slowly. "I always thought Dolores would have done something with that fund," she said casually. I blinked. "What fund?" "You know, the money your grandfather left for your boy," she replied like she was discussing weather. "Back before he passed, he told us, 'That's my parting gift to Wesson's son. That boy deserves a future.'" I stared at her. I didn't nod. I didn't ask anything else. I just let the air between us sit, thick and pulsing. My grandfather had set aside something for Jude, and Dolores had never said a word. Clara didn't even realize what she'd dropped. She just smiled and moved on to find more coffee. I stood still, like if I didn't move, I could maybe keep from unraveling in public. That was a secret, something that wasn't meant for me to know. But now I did, and I couldn't unknow it. Later, I wandered into the dining room where the table was still cluttered from the party. Paper name cards, discarded napkins, leftover favors in little gold bags, and the printed guest list. I picked it up, thumbing through pages until I found ours. Wes and Jude. Uncertain arrival. Our names were there, but crossed out in blue ink. In the margins, scrawled in that familiar looping handwriting, "Corliss says leave off if needed." Same pen had circled guests who were sent thank you notes. Ours wasn't one of them. No room at the table. No room in the records. I was invited only if convenient. I'd shown up anyway, and that was my mistake. I walked to the photo wall again. Framed moments, carefully lit. Dolores and Corliss at some beach house. Brielle holding a puppy. Even Clara, blurry but smiling. Not a single photo of me. Or Jude. I pulled out my phone. Opened the picture of Jude handing Dolores his drawing, the same one she buried under a pile of napkins. I stared at the screen, then looked back at the photo table. Blood may tie us together, but erasure is louder than silence. I walked into the kitchen, placed my coffee cup gently on the counter. Corliss was there, flipping through a recipe book like she hadn't just crossed out her sister's name like expired yogurt. "If you ever cut my son out of anything again," I said, voice low and even, "be it pictures, gifts, or names, you'll see just how quietly I can make noise." Corliss didn't flinch. She just looked up, raised a brow, smirked. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said. "That's your skill. I deal in reality." Dolores entered at that moment, breaking the tension with a forced little laugh. "Let's not fight, it's family," she offered, as if that was reason enough to excuse everything. I looked at both of them, one too polished, one too distant. "Exactly," I said. "That's why I'm speaking now, because family doesn't mean silence." The smell of bacon hit me before I even reached the stairs. Coffee, too. Strong, overbrewed, drifting through the floorboards like it had somewhere to be. Jude was already sitting up, blinking at the ceiling with the kind of quiet kids use when they don't want to ask if it's okay to feel sad. I helped him dress, neither of us saying much. That silence, we'd started wearing it like a second layer of skin. Upstairs, the house buzzed again. Not as loud as yesterday, but still full of motion. Brunch was underway. People moved between rooms with coffee mugs, complimenting casseroles, talking over one another with the confidence of those who've always been included. We made it to the kitchen. A long counter displayed name-labeled plates, fresh fruit, and eggs. Jude searched the line, tiptoed to peek further. Nothing with our names. Nothing, period. I asked one of the helpers, trying to sound casual. "Are there extra plates?" He checked the list. "Sorry, your names weren't on the prep list." Before I could respond, Corliss leaned in from behind with a bright, too-sweet tone. "You know how last-minute RSVPs mess everything up." I smiled, like someone taught me to. Jude was offered a slice of dry toast from the edge of the serving tray. I declined, placing my hand over his. "We'll eat later." The dining table inside was full. Corliss gestured to a small folding table by the trash bin near the back door. "There's space over there. Quieter, more private," she said, her lips twitching like the words held a joke only she could hear. We sat. The folding chairs creaked every time we shifted. Behind us, the trash bags thumped, someone replacing them again and again. Jude nibbled a cracker from my purse. He didn't ask why we weren't with the others, but I saw the question in his eyes. Dolores passed by, not looking directly at us, and muttered, "Well, at least someone's using that side of the room." Jude leaned closer. "Why are we over here?" I looked at him. "Because some people don't know how to seat family." He nodded slowly, chewing quietly. I scanned the room, not as a guest, not anymore. I looked at it like a witness. Every laugh toward Corliss landed like rehearsed applause. Every compliment about her pulling the whole event together felt like it had a price tag underneath. I pulled out a granola bar, handed it to Jude. He took it without a word, careful not to drop crumbs on the floor like it was borrowed space. I didn't feel like family. I felt like someone who had snuck into a hotel lobby and was pretending to belong. Dolores clinked her glass a few minutes later, standing near the head of the main table. "Before we all rush back to our busy lives, I just want to thank Corliss for organizing this weekend, for setting everything up, for making this house feel like a home." Applause followed. Not wild, but enough. The kind of clapping you do when you've already decided not to question anything. I gripped the edge of the table, not out of anger, but to remind myself I was still grounded. I thought about my father, how he used to say, "Sometimes being family means shutting up." I used to believe that, but now I knew better. Silence might keep peace, but it never built respect. When the meal wound down, I stood quietly and started clearing our plates. Corliss caught it, of course. "Playing maid now, too?" she said lightly, as if it were a joke. I looked at her, not angry, not loud, just steady. "No. I'm removing the evidence that we were placed like the help." A few heads turned. The room stalled for a beat, but no one said anything. I walked the dishes to the kitchen, rinsed them without rush. Dolores stood near the sink, drying a glass, eyes flicking toward me like she was debating something. I turned to her, placing the plate gently in the rack. "I think it's time we talk about what this house really stands for." Her lips pursed slightly. "This isn't the time." I smiled, just enough to keep it from being mistaken for sarcasm. "That's the problem, it never is." It was just after noon when we made our way upstairs, the kind of time where everything slows down but pretends to keep moving. No more guests, just leftovers on plates, chairs half-turned from conversations that had run out of steam. Jude walked ahead of me, socked feet making soft thuds on the hardwood. Corliss sat on the living room couch, legs curled under her in the master bedroom robe, one of those monogrammed ones with piping along the sleeves. She scrolled through her phone like nothing existed outside that screen. Dolores was in the kitchen, humming something tuneless while arranging sandwich halves on a platter. Brielle stood at the island, cutting grapes with a plastic knife and looking proud of it. I moved through them all like background noise. Jude asked for a towel after his shower. I told him I'd get him a clean one. Upstairs linen closet. I remember that smell even before I touched the handle. Perfume that didn't belong to either of us. The towel on top was damp, still warm, wrinkled like it had been used just that morning. Then Corliss walked by. "I used that one earlier," she said, not even looking at me. "Didn't think anyone else would need it." I didn't say anything. I didn't grab another towel. Back in the basement, I dried Jude with a soft cotton t-shirt from my suitcase. There are kinds of poverty that have nothing to do with money. That sentence ran through my head like a song on loop. At lunch, we were all around the table, though around was generous. Jude and I sat near the corner. The main talk flowed between Corliss and Dolores, bouncing like a tennis match that nobody else got to play in. Corliss went on about Brielle's private tennis camp. It's not about winning, she said. It's about structure, about investing early. Dolores nodded like she was co-signing something eternal. She's the kind of daughter who thinks long-term. Dependable. Jude tried to say something once about how he liked running track. No one acknowledged him. He didn't try again. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even fidget. But I listened. I catalogued. I remembered. Then, mid-bite of chicken salad, a neighbor from 2 doors down knocked and returned a ceramic baking dish. "You have such wonderful daughters," she said, smiling. Dolores didn't miss a beat. "Well, Corliss is my only daughter, really. She's always been my rock." My fork paused, not clattered, not dropped, just paused. The woman smiled awkwardly, clearly confused. Jude's face tilted up toward mine. I didn't respond. Not there, not then. I just kept chewing. After lunch, I started washing the dishes. No one asked me to. It was muscle memory at this point. I remembered being in college, writing essays in the corner of the library at 2 a.m., while everyone else partied. I remembered working back-to-back shifts through flu season just to pay rent. I remembered the phone call when Jude was burning up with a fever, and I asked Dolores for help, and she said, "Have you asked Corliss?" This wasn't neglect. This wasn't preference. This was strategy. Long game stuff. And I'd been benched without even realizing I was in the game. As I slid the last plate into the dishwasher, Corliss brushed behind me and whispered, "Don't take things so personally. This is just how families work." I turned to her. My voice was calm. Still. "Then maybe it's time this one stopped working." I went to the living room for my phone. I'd left it charging on the corner table by the bay window. It wasn't about checking texts. I just needed something to do with my hands. Something that didn't involve pretending to enjoy the weight of being ignored. Brielle was perched on the edge of the couch, talking loudly to Clara about how grown-up she felt wearing real jewelry. She extended her wrist like she was presenting something sacred. That bracelet, I knew it before I even saw it fully. Silver chain, small garnet inset, delicate clasp I'd picked out carefully years ago. I'd given it to Dolores after my first promotion, the one I fought tooth and nail for while juggling night classes and single motherhood. "Grandma said I deserved something nice," Brielle chirped. Clara nodded, sipping iced tea like it was all just adorable. I didn't say a word, but inside something shifted. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. Even things wrapped in love could be reassigned when love itself was a performance. A couple hours later, Corliss announced a girl's photo in the backyard. "Let's take one before the light fades," she called out, already fixing her hair. Dolores lit up like someone had handed her an award. Brielle giggled and skipped ahead, already in a matching robe. They had 3 laid out on the patio chairs. I wasn't asked, just handed one as an afterthought. Still had the tag on it. It didn't fit right, shoulders too tight, sleeves too short, but I put it on anyway. I smiled for the photo. Not wide, not forced, just enough to say, "I'm here. I know." Dolores positioned herself in the middle, Corliss on one side, Brielle on the other. I stood slightly behind, angled off. I could already see how the photo would be cropped. Later that evening, after the thank you hugs and selfie session ended, I took a walk around the side garden with Jude. The sun was dipping just below the trees, making everything look golden and soft, like things were better than they were. Jude tugged my hand gently. "Mom?" "Yeah?" "Why does Grandma love Brielle more than me?" My breath caught. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even angry. He just wanted to understand. I kneeled beside him in the gravel. "She doesn't love you less, Jude," I said slowly. "She just hasn't learned how to love equally." He nodded like he was too young to know better, but too old not to feel it anyway. That moment sealed it. I was done asking for room. That night, the rest of the family circled up in the living room, trading old stories, sipping wine, getting comfortable with their version of reality. I went downstairs, opened my laptop. Subject line: Formal documentation of personal contributions to Dolores Hannity's estate, for legal record. Attached, a PDF of money I'd transferred to Dolores over the years, help with utilities, emergency dental bills, groceries during the early COVID months, scans of cards I'd sent, photos of gifts that went unacknowledged, notes from conversations, dates, times, receipts. It wasn't petty, it wasn't revenge, it was history, and I wasn't about to let anyone else write it for me anymore. Later, when Jude was asleep, I sat beside him and breathed deep. My therapist's words echoed from a session years ago when I'd just started clawing my way out of the guilt I never earned. You don't have to win a war. You just have to stop showing up for the battle they started. I smiled a little, turned off the lamp. Tomorrow I wouldn't fight. I'd document. Strategically. Quietly. Without apology. Before I went to bed, I opened the photo from earlier. Me in the background, barely in frame, and saved it to my notes app. Captioned it, "The last time I stood behind them." Then I booked the moving van, not because I was afraid of staying, but because I was finally clear on what I was no longer willing to live beneath. My screen locked, then lit up again. A text from Corliss. "You're not planning something, are you?" The final dinner wasn't announced. It just unfolded, like they'd all silently agreed it would happen without needing to loop me in. Jude was told to dress nice. The invite came from Brielle in a sing-song voice. "Grandma says everyone's coming for one last dinner." Not from Dolores, not from Corliss. But I got the message, loud enough. By the time we walked into the dining room, the lights were dimmed just enough to feel intentional, like they were trying to soften whatever was about to happen. The table was set, place cards printed in gold cursive. Ours weren't there. Dolores had made a roast. Corliss had folded napkins into roses. Brielle had made a sign that said, "So grateful for family." I took my seat without asking where. Passing through the kitchen, I stopped. Something behind the trash can caught my eye. Paper, bent, crumpled, like it had slipped between the wall and the waste bin. I reached for it. Jude's card, the one he gave Dolores the day we arrived. It was smeared with something greasy, the edges torn slightly, like it had been stepped on. I picked it up slowly, brushing it off. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That card wasn't forgotten. It was thrown away. Dinner carried on. Small talk. More laughter. Brielle retelling some joke she'd heard from a classmate. Corliss shining under the overhead light like a candidate mid-campaign. Then Dolores rose from her chair, smiling. "We've had such a lovely weekend. So much laughter. So much love. And Corliss, sweetheart, thank you for bringing this home to life." Applause followed, the kind you don't think about before doing. Just hands clapping because that's what's expected. When dessert plates were cleared, Dolores walked a pair of neighbors through the house. The grand tour. I followed, not close enough to be seen, just enough to hear. "This piece here, Corliss found it at an estate sale. And these drapes." She picked them herself. The neighbors nodded politely, murmured, "Beautiful." Photos lined the hallways. Brielle's kindergarten graduation, Corliss in her college cap, a vacation in Maine, not a single picture of Jude. Or me. One of the neighbors asked, "Didn't I hear you have a son, too?" Dolores paused, just long enough to signal discomfort. "Oh, he doesn't live close. It's complicated." I backed away. Complicated. That's what she called it. Back in the living room, everyone was settling in again. Wine glasses refilled. Voices softened into that lull where everyone thinks the night's winding down. That's when I stood up, phone in hand. Before we all leave tomorrow, I said, calm but clear, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. Heads turned. Corliss blinked. Especially Corliss, I added. Without her, none of this illusion would have held together. A few chuckles, nervous ones. I pressed play on the audio file. Dolores's voice came first. Let her stay down in the basement, she's used to it. Then Corliss's laugh. It's the only place that makes sense for her. Silence hit the room like a slap. Dolores's smile collapsed. Corliss went still, frozen mid-sip. I looked at my mother. I didn't record this to humiliate you. I did it so I could stop wondering if I was just being sensitive. Turns out I wasn't. I pulled the crushed card from my purse, held it up. This is what my son made for you, and this is where I found it. I walked to the coffee table, laid it down flat, smoothing the bent edges. You can keep it, since you like pretending things are still whole. No yelling, no crying, just the facts. The kind of facts that don't need debate. Jude stood quietly behind me, small hands holding the hem of my shirt. I turned to him, smiled gently. Let's pack. We walked toward the hallway. Corliss's voice chased after us. You always loved a scene. I didn't turn around. I just said, no. But I never minded being the ending. I packed without saying a word. Jude brushed his teeth with the door cracked just wide enough to hear the hush of upstairs voices, none of them ours. I folded clothes into the suitcase like they were files being closed. The card he'd made, what was left of it, still sat on top of my bag. I hadn't moved it since last night. No one had come down since. When the knock came on the basement door, I froze. But it was only the heater clicking on again. Loud. Disrespectful. Familiar. I looked around the room. At the low ceiling, the dented washer, the smell of bleach baked into the walls, this wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't even disappointment anymore. It was detachment. Jude yelped. I turned fast, saw him clutching his leg. Pipe, he muttered through gritted teeth. The heater again. I knelt beside him, saw the red welt starting to bloom. It wasn't serious, but it was real. I got a washcloth, soaked it in cold water, wrapped it gently around his leg. That's it, I whispered. We're leaving, now. He looked at me. Are we going to tell them? I shook my head. They already told us everything they needed to by letting us stay here. He nodded once, like he already understood more than he should. We finished packing, zipped the bags, and waited outside for the ride. I'd booked it while drying Jude's leg. No fanfare. No goodbye. Dolores stood in the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching us but not moving. Corliss was out on the patio, misting plants that didn't need misting, pretending to be too busy to notice we were leaving. I didn't go inside. I just slid the house key into the mailbox with a folded note. Thank you for the space. We won't need it again. The car pulled up. I loaded the bags. Jude climbed in first, quietly buckling his seatbelt. We didn't talk for the first 10 minutes of the drive. Then Jude reached for my hand. We held on like people bracing for something that already happened. I looked out the window. Trees, road signs, old gas stations with broken pumps, things that had seen better years. I thought about how we're taught family is permanent, a sacred thing, like it's written in bone and blood and can't be undone. But maybe family is more like a lease, and sometimes you outgrow the contract. My phone buzzed. I didn't check it. Instead, I closed my eyes and remembered every face that had stood by me through harder years. Friends, co-workers, even strangers who saw me clearer than people who shared my last name ever had. Distance doesn't make you estranged. Cruelty does. Jude's voice broke the silence. Will we ever come back? I didn't answer right away. Then, you can always choose to visit people, but you never owe your peace to anyone. He nodded. I think I liked us better when we were just us. I smiled at him. Me too. And I meant it, not as a coping mechanism, as a truth. I hadn't lost a family. I'd reclaimed myself. By the time we got to the airport, the sky had turned that soft, blurry blue that makes even Florida look calm. We checked our bags, made it through security. The boarding gate was almost empty when we sat down. When the plane took off, I looked out the window, not to remember, but to confirm what we were leaving behind. As the coast disappeared below, I reached into my purse and pulled out Jude's card. I smoothed it out one last time. A flight attendant passed by. She smiled down at it. "That's beautiful." I nodded, folded it carefully, and placed it in the back pocket of my journal. For the first time in days, I exhaled without flinching.